Welcome to the debate. Usually, a memoir only gets published if you've, won an Oscar, started a billion-dollar company, or maybe committed a high-profile crime.
Right, something extreme.
Exactly. We expect these books to be monuments to exceptionalism. But what happens when an entirely unknown, everyday person publishes their life story?
You don't get a detached history of greatness, that's for sure.
No, you get a mirror. And that is exactly what confronts the reader in R.C. Howard's Life Lessons of a Man-Child. I'm your host, taking the advocate position today, and we're looking at a text that blends personal essays, short stories, and pop culture musings from an author who is decidedly not famous.
And I'm your host, taking the dissenting view. This source material is fascinating because it defies the conventional boundaries of autobiography, really oscillating between raw nonfiction, sci-fi metaphors, and deeply introspective fiction.
It forces us to ask how an ordinary life generates meaning. So today we're asking a fundamental question about this material. What constitutes the most empowering aspect of this non-celebrity memoir?
It's a huge question.
It is. And I argue that the book's true power, its most profoundly empowering element really, lies in its underlying spiritual trajectory. The narrative arc moves deliberately from childhood escapism, navigating the brutal realities of the adult world, into a profound discovery of faith.
A total surrender, essentially.
Yes, a total surrender to the unseen. The hidden gem of this book is its assertion that an ordinary life only truly makes sense and only finds lasting peace when it is anchored in trusting a higher power. It models how stripping away our adult defense mechanisms, specifically what the author identifies as the doubter's mask, is the only way to achieve true spiritual resolution.
I come at it from a different way. The ultimate empowerment of this book is fundamentally secular, rooted in human agency and creative defiance.
Creative defiance?
Yeah, it is a calculated rebellion against what the author calls the creativity zapping vortex of adulthood. Howard is proving a much more accessible thesis, which is that you do not need to be famous or perfectly polished to justify sharing your existence with the world. You simply need the courage to observe and create.
Okay, but
The hidden gem here is his validation of the man-child identity, right? The deliberate retention of a childlike imagination. He uses that imagination as a primary tool to process trauma, forge authentic human connections, and ultimately leave a tangible legacy.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. While the book absolutely uses pop culture and 1980s nostalgia as a brilliant hook to pull the reader in, that creative energy is merely the vehicle.
Just a vehicle?
Yeah, it is not the destination. If we examine the mechanics of how the author peels away those adult defense mechanisms, we see that non-celebrity empowerment comes not through self-reliance or the mere act of telling a story. It comes through a radical spiritual awakening.
See, I think the creativity you are focusing on is the core mechanism of his survival. It is how he processes reality from the very beginning.
The prologue to the faith, I'd say.
Well, consider the foundation of wonder in the early sections, specifically the fruit and the mansion. Howard does not just look at an apple. He completely deconstructs it.
Right, the whole Martian snow globe thing?
Exactly. He views it through a child's eyes, transforming its speckled skin into a Martian snow globe. And then he deliberately rewrites that observation in the style of Walt Whitman. He is demonstrating that observation itself is a superpower.
A superpower.
By paying fierce attention to the mundane, he empowers the ordinary individual to elevate the forgettable into the unforgettable. It is an act of creative will, not divine intervention.
Notice, though, that even in that Whitman-esque reimagining of the apple, the imagery becomes a bridge between heaven and earth. The wonder is consistently pointing upward, seeking a broader cosmic context.
The context he creates is built entirely by human imagination, though. We see the mechanics of this even more clearly in the mansion. Think about what he is doing psychologically when he takes a tiny, cramped, 900-square-foot home with a roaring attic fan and refuses to let it be a symbol of poverty.
He calls it Castle Grayskull.
He mentally reconstructs it as Castle Grayskull. Yeah, he reclaims his environment. And when they finally move to the actual mansion, empowerment does not arrive as a spiritual epiphany. It arrives in the form of a Tandy color computer 2.
Oh, wow, the old bulky beige box.
That bulky beige box becomes his digital frontier. It gives a latchkey kid a sense of absolute agency, inputs equal guaranteed outputs, and in turning, this secular escapism reaches its peak utility.
Where he uses Star Wars.
Yes, he uses Star Wars as a literal psychological shield against middle school bullies and the visceral pain of his parents' divorce. Creativity and make-believe are the active forces protecting his psyche.
They shield him temporarily, yes, but turning actually exists in the manuscript to expose the severe limitations of that exact secular escapism.
How so?
Well, when you look at the progression of that story, the mechanism of hiding in pop culture breaks down as he enters adulthood. How does he try to cope with adult emptiness? By building what he calls the Mr. Success mask.
Oh, right, the giant TVs.
He accumulates 30-inch TVs, massive 16-inch Sherwin Vega speakers, and just hoards VHS tapes. To understand the psychology here, think of it like installing heavier and heavier armor on a sinking ship.
That's a good analogy.
The giant speakers and the screens feel like protection. They look imposing, but they actually just make the ship sink faster because they do not patch the hole in the hull. They just deafen you to the sound of the water rushing in. The voids remain unfilled.
Sure, but
The author explicitly notes that he had to mature past being a confused Padawan, hoarding pop culture to actually face reality.
he matures, certainly, but he never abandons the imagination. He integrates it. The man-child philosophy is about blending youthful wonder with grown-up responsibility, not discarding the youth.
I suppose that's fair.
Look at how he applies this integrated imagination to deep trauma in Wounded Sparrow. This story is a masterclass in why storytelling is the ultimate psychological tool for survival. Howard creates the fictional character of Henry, a 12-year-old boy who throws a skillet of hot grease to stop his abusive father.
A harrowing sequence, definitely.
And then he desperately tries to save that same father from the resulting house fire.
But we have to ask why he's using fiction there instead of direct autobiography.
Because the fiction creates a necessary psychological buffer. Howard is using the narrative of Henry and the profound imagery of the wounded sparrow surviving its collision with the window to process his own very raw, very real grief over his mother's dementia.
Right.
The tragedy of a parent fading away is too massive, too chaotic to face head-on. So he builds a world of make-believe to contain the fear, to give it edges so he can actually hold it.
He references Fred Rogers there for a reason, pointing out that Mr. Rogers used the neighborhood of make-believe not to flee the world, but to safely navigate its darkest corners.
Exactly. The empowerment here is entirely rooted in the human capacity to craft a narrative that makes surviving the unbearable possible.
But Mr. Rogers wasn't the endgame, and neither is the fiction of Wounded Sparrow. Escapism, even beautifully crafted literary escapism, is essentially anesthesia.
Anesthesia? That's a bit harsh, isn't it?
It numbs the acute pain of his mother's decline, allowing him to endure it, but it does not cure the underlying existential dread. Mere survival is not the ultimate empowerment, Howard finds. If we look at the mechanics of the story God tags, we see the critical transition from merely coping with trauma to achieving profound resolution.
God tags is a stark pivot in the tone of the book. I will grant you that.
It is the absolute crux of the memoir's thesis. We have a Marine on a turbulent flight clutching the dog tag of his fallen best friend, Frank. Psychologically, this Marine is consumed by survivor's guilt. Because of his background as a radio technician, his default trauma response is the need to control his environment. He needs to fix things, but he is in a situation of violently shaking airplane where he has zero control.
He's totally helpless.
He sits next to a little girl holding a small cross. Through their brief interaction, the physical daddy tags become God tags. This is the moment Howard illustrates the mechanics of true faith. The Marine is strapped into a metal tube. He cannot fly it.
Right.
He must surrender to the unseen mechanics of the airplane, trusting the pilots. Howard uses this as a direct parallel for surrendering to the unseen hands of God. This is a monumental shift in the author's worldview.
It is a big shift. Yes.
The empowerment no longer comes from creating a fictional world to control the narrative, as he did with Henry. The empowerment comes from explicitly relinquishing control. He moves from metal to meaning, from the exhausting burden of self-reliance to the profound relief of faith.
I understand the parallel you are drawing with the airplane, but you are isolating the surrender from the action of writing itself. The narrative of faith in this book is inextricably bound to human action and legacy.
How so?
Even when Howard is dealing with the divine, he roots the experience deeply in the physical, creative act of storytelling. The empowerment isn't just sitting back and surrendering. It is in having the audacity to document that surrender so others can witness it. The pen is still in his hand.
The pen is in his hand, but the documentation is an act of spiritual testimony, not just secular legacy. Let us look at how he handles guilt and forgiveness in 2 letters.
Oh, the Gothic graveyard story.
Yes, in this atmospheric story set in a graveyard, the protagonist is haunted by the death of his fiancée, Sarah, and the letters YF he carved into a tree. We watch those letters evolve in his tormented mind from your friend to your fault.
It's a very dark evolution.
It is. Storytelling alone cannot cure that level of internalized guilt. Only grace can. Ultimately, a raven acting as a symbol of enduring memory and providence guides his realization, and the letters evolve to your faith.
Right.
It is his estranged wife Melissa who physically leads him to an old church, pointing directly to the scripture Luke 12, verses 2 and 3, about what is hidden being made known. The spiritual resolution, the intervention of divine grace, is the only mechanism powerful enough to heal the broken marriage.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
By all means.
You are prioritizing the religious imagery over the visceral human action that drives these stories forward. Yes, the Gothic elements and 2 letters resolve in a church, but the actual healing requires human reconciliation. Melissa showing up, the protagonist choosing to forgive himself.
Grace facilitates that.
We see this dynamic even more clearly in swimming lessons. Aunt Margie, who cannot swim, dives into a murky, terrifying strip pit to save her brother from a sinking car. Howard ties this to Isaiah 43, verse 2, and he frames his Memoir's single-ring phone call pact as proof of God keeping promises.
It's a beautiful framing.
But the mechanics of that scene, that is sheer, fierce human grit. That is the unbreakable bond of family forcing a woman into suffocating water to save someone she loves. The memoir does not end in a church pew passively receiving grace. It ends with a manifesto for human creation.
You are focusing on the final chapter, My First Time.
Yes, the poem and the closing essay. Howard painstakingly tracks the universal human experience from our first breath to our descent into the grave.
The ticking clock motif.
Exactly. The recurring, capitalized refrain is time crawls by, time moves on. It is a relentless ticking clock reminding us of our mortality. And what is his final plea to the reader in the chapter titled, Create Before It's Too Late?
It's definitely a push to write.
It is not a call to prayer. It is a demand for artistic action. He writes that stories are meant to outlive us. The true hidden gem of this memoir is the author's insistence that an ordinary, non-celebrity life achieves a form of immortality, a lasting legacy, by daring to put words on a page.
True.
He says, you don't finish a story because it's flawless. You finish it because you cared enough to capture it. That is an entirely secular, humanistic empowerment. It validates the everyday person's right to exist in the historical record, typos and all.
Capturing the story is absolutely his call to action, but the substance of what he is capturing is his witness to the divine grace that shaped his life. Think about the masks he describes shedding in the conclusion.
Right, the various masks.
The Mr. Success mask, the Peacekeeper mask, the Doubter's mask. He explicitly details how the Doubter's mask only falls away when he admits his own powerlessness and trusts that God is in control. The creativity you are elevating is, within Howard's own philosophical framework, simply the light of the Creator reflecting through the creature.
That's a very theological read.
When he urges the reader to look past their pride and prejudice to see the human beneath, he is advocating for a radical, spiritually driven empathy that only becomes possible once the ego is surrendered.
But the mechanism he uses to teach that empathy is shared storytelling. Look at his brilliant, cheeky inclusion of the imagined reviews by Mark Twain, Charles Bukowski, and Jane Austen.
That was a fun touch.
By putting his non-celebrity work in the mouths of literary giants, he is claiming space in the canon. He uses Bukowski's imagined voice to say creativity isn't about being perfect. It's about being brave. It's about taking your scars, your fears, your screw-ups, and turning them into something that matters.
Right.
The empowerment lies in the messy, deeply human act of taking the raw, unpolished material of an ordinary life and forging it into art. He proves you don't need fame, you just need a keyboard and the courage to stop doom-scrolling through the algorithmic ocean long enough to leave your own mark.
And yet, what is the mark he ultimately leaves? A testament to grace, stabilizing chaos. He notes that the hardest place to practice radical empathy is not in a novel, but at the kitchen table with family.
Which is incredibly true.
The humility required to pause and ask, what story am I missing, instead of issuing a sarcastic comeback, is a rigorous spiritual discipline. He found that discipline through his faith. Without that spiritual maturation, the man-child would still be sitting in a dark room playing Contra, hoarding video games to avoid the friction of reality.
That's a little dismissive of the gaming, though.
The spiritual trajectory is what gives his creativity its substance and its grounding.
We have to acknowledge, though, that he views the gaming and the pop culture not as a disease to be cured, but as the very training ground for his adult resilience. He argues that playing Super Mario or The Legend of Zelda taught him to see real-world challenges as side quests.
Right, a framework.
It gave a powerless kid a framework for overcoming obstacles. Maintaining that childlike imagination is precisely what allows him to look at a bruised, battered world and still feel wonder. That is a deeply empowering message for any adult feeling crushed by the weight of corporate or societal expectations.
It is an empowering message, and the way he threads that needle brings us to a fascinating point of convergence in our reading. We are analyzing a text that manages to seamlessly blend 1980s pop culture nostalgia with profound existential and theological reflection.
Which is a rare feat.
And I have to say, examining the mechanics of his surrender provided the exact framework I needed to understand my own faith. Watching him shed the doubter's mask and relinquish control wasn't just an academic exercise for me. It genuinely guided me toward finding God in my own life. It made me realize that peace often comes exactly when you stop trying to script every outcome.
Oh, wow. That is powerful. I hear that, and I respect the profound impact that trajectory had on you. But for me, the impact of this book was fiercely grounded in the here and now. Reading his manifesto to create before it is too late completely dismantled my own excuses.
Wait, really? Did it make you want to write?
Yes. It gave me this overwhelming urgency to finally sit down, stop worrying about being a nobody, and write my own story. Whether you view the ultimate empowerment as the spiritual piece of surrendering to God or the creative courage to forge your own legacy, the book unequivocally proves its central thesis.
That you do not need an Oscar or a billion-dollar company to have a life worth documenting.
Exactly.
The life of an ordinary person, navigating middle school bullies, a parent's divorce, a mother's dementia, and the mundane struggles of family life, contains just as much pathos and triumph as any epic. R.C. Howard shows us that the power is in the telling.
The messy, unpolished telling.
Right. The act of sharing our flaws and our first breaths, our first mistakes, is what bridges the gap between us and allows us to connect with each other, and ultimately with the divine.
It is a text that demands you look at your own life and ask what you are leaving behind.
As we close today's discussion, we won't declare a definitive winner between the spiritual surrender and the secular legacy interpretations. Instead, we leave you, the listener, to weigh the evidence and form your own conclusion. But let us return to that time capsule we discussed at the beginning of the show.
When you finally dig it up,
When you finally dig it up, crack the seal, and look inside, what reflection are you hoping to see in that mirror? And more importantly, are you brave enough to write down what you find?